When I was 12 years old, I was gearing up for an awesome Halloween out with my friends. At that time, it was still relatively safe for kids to go combing neighborhoods in search of candy and treats without a lot of parental supervision. Times have certainly changed now, but after this incident, I'm not sure I'd ever want my kids out alone at night, especially on Halloween. Cider Mill Road was long and scattered with a lot of houses. It was an area that was known to be spooky, mainly because there was an old house at the end which had lots of swirling ghost stories. I had heard many childhood whispers and legends. There was an apple orchard years ago, and the slaves had been brutally murdered. The original owner had hung himself at the top of the staircase. There were so many stories, but all the town kids were enamored by the house. We would ride bikes by the house in hopes of catching a glimpse into its history. We were all certain it was filled with all sorts of paranormal delights. After trick-or-treating for several hours and almost reaching the end of Cider Mill Road, a friend suggested we go knock on the door of the house and see if anyone answered. We knew an old woman lived there by the last name of Murphy. No one ever saw her out much, but she had inherited the property and had lived there for 50 years. It was a big house, especially for one person. I always thought it had to be lonely to be unmarried, with no children and living in such a big old run-down house. My dad called it decayed gentry, although I had no idea what that meant. The driveway went up through the orchard which lay sprawling in front of the house. No one tended to the apples anymore, and so most of them lay rotting on the ground, which by October was more of a rotting stench than an apple fragrance. "Hey, you go up and ring the bell," Jessica told me. "I'm not going by myself." "Take Olivia with you," she said. Olivia shook her head. "I don't think so. It's getting late. I need to get home." Jessica grabbed our hands. "We'll all go together." "It smells bad," Olivia said. "I don't want to go up there." "I agree. Yeah, the apples stink. If an old woman lives here, she might already be in bed. She probably doesn't want trick-or-treaters. She doesn't even have a front porch light on." Olivia said, "Universal sign for leave me alone." "You guys are such chickens. Come on. It's Halloween. Let's just do this, and then when we go to school on Monday and tell everyone what happened, we'll be the coolest kids in class." Much to my dismay, we were being led further up the dark gravel driveway to the dilapidated mansion at the top of the hill. Olivia had some neon glow stick bracelets, which was the only light we were able to see because it was pitch black and we didn't have flashlights. It had been a fairly cloudy night, although it was almost a full moon. We had only had glimpses of moonlight the entire night. None of us thought ahead to bring any light sources. When we reached the top of the hill where the house was positioned, I got cold chill. I was shaking. I don't know if it was the temperature outside or the fact that I was frightened, but my teeth were slightly chattering. The three of us approached the house and climbed up onto the porch. Jessica pushed me forward. "Ring the doorbell," she was whispering. "I don't have to ring the bell," I said. She pushed me again. "Just do it." I stepped forward. My eyes had begun to adjust to the darkness, and I could see the door in front of me with elaborate stained glass. Although my hand was shaking, I reached for the bell. I pressed it. Immediately, Jessica and Olivia start giggling and screaming. They take off running, leaving me standing on the porch. I heard a noise from inside the house. I darted off the porch. I tripped over my witch's dress and fell face first on the grass. My pumpkin-shaped bucket filled with candy spilled onto the ground, but I was too scared to bother with it. I threw the bucket down, trying to see my way to the drive, but it was dark. I could hear the girls giggling in the distance somewhere ahead of me. My feet hit the gravel on the road. My heart was pounding. Why was I so scared? I was on the road now and away from the house. I was in a safe place. The old woman was probably in bed. She hadn't even opened the front door. I told myself not to be afraid. I was fine now. We were just being dumb kids. I had slowed from a sprint down. I was breathing heavily but slowed down to walk. I could make out headlights down Cider Mill, so I knew I was not far from the road. Those girls would be waiting down there at the end for me. I'd give them a piece of my mind. When all of a sudden, out of nowhere, two hands were grabbing at my chest from behind. Something was pulling me. I let out a scream. Something had me. I could hear it snarling and hissing as it pulled me. I tried fighting it off. It was dragging me over to the side of the driveway. I could see the outline of an apple tree in the moonlight. I could smell that rotting stench. I was only 12, but I was fighting as hard as I could. I was screaming and yelling, "Helping me." I tried hitting the arms off me. I was as combative as I possibly could be, feeling like I was fighting for my life. Whoever had me was not letting go. I felt sharp nails digging into my chest while it was pulling me toward the apple trees. "Who are you? Let me go." The clouds must have moved away from the moon, because for a moment again the moonlight was shining down, illuminating the orchard around me. That's when I caught a glimpse. What had its arms around me was an old woman. I managed to twist myself loose, and the second I did, I felt her sharp nails on my back, but I took off running. I ran through the orchard, dodging trees. I felt the disintegrating apples squishing and oozing under my feet. At one point, I slipped and fell into a pile of mush. I finally made my way to the gravel and did not stop until I was at the main road. Of course, my actual friends were posted up waiting for me, but the minute they saw me bolting by, they did not laugh. I was in shock. Somehow we managed to get to a neighbor's house where the person called my parents to come pick me up. My friends explained what had happened and how they left me at the house. I had scratch marks on both my chest and back from the incident. My parents decided we needed to call the police and make a report. The police officers thought it was probably just a Halloween prank, probably some teenagers trying to scare me. We ended up getting a huge lecture from the police officer and our parents. The next day was a Sunday. I was still really terrified about what had happened and was adamant it was not just some teenage kids messing with us. I kept telling my parents over and over that it was something else. My mom finally told me it was enough and over with, and we didn't need to rehash it again. By early evening, I had settled into being a bit calmer about the whole thing when the phone rang. My dad answered, and after a few minutes of "Yes, I see and I understand," he came into the den where I was piled up watching television. My mom was sitting in her chair reading a book. She looked up at my dad, who was kind of pale. "What is it, George?" she asked. He looked at us both with astonishment and said, "That was Deputy Richardson from last night. He went over to do a welfare check on Mrs. Murphy after they couldn't reach her last night for questioning. It turns out Mrs. Murphy was dead inside her house the whole time. Apparently, the coroner says he estimates roughly that she probably died back in August. He says they still have no signs of anyone else being at the house last night. The house had not been broken into or anything. The only thing they found outside was your bucket of candy, which was all over the ground just like you said." "Honey, didn't you say it was an old woman who grabbed you?" Mom asked, horrified. To this day, I have no idea if it was actually an old woman that grabbed me or something paranormal, and honestly, I don't want to know either way. So when I was 16, me and my friends decided to go trick or treating. I know we shouldn't have because we were too old, but we decided we wanted candy. The friends I was going with were very close. I won't use real names, so I will use numbers. Friend 1 was short, but really muscular. He had an explosive personality and had to go to anger management. Friend 2 was about my height and was really skinny. He was also kind of nerdy. It was planned that we would go as Mario characters. I would be Luigi. Friend 1 would be Mario and friend 3 would be Wario. That night, me and friend 1 gathered at my house and waited for friend 2. When friend 2 finally arrived, he was not alone. He had brought with him this 9th grader proudly wearing a Waluigi costume. Let's call him friend 3. I recognized him as the new kid. He had just moved to the area but seemed pretty nice, so we let him come along. We started at around 6:30, but we were so efficient that by 9:30 we had already hit every house in our neighborhood and some in the next neighborhood. Tired of hauling around these giant pillowcases, we decided to go rest at a bench on the sidewalk. We took about 2 minutes to catch our breath and then we were off. When we got up, we started walking and realized that no houses were still serving candy. Friend 3 brought to our attention the fact that it was now 10:20. We all stopped and agreed to go home after one last house. Only one house still had its light on, so we went there. When we got there, friend 2 knocked on the door and a balding man in a white tank top answered the door. I was instantly freaked out by this man. His balding hair combined with his overall disheveled appearance caused a visible disturbance in all of us. "Well, what do you want?" said the man in a thick New England accent. None of us answered. The man's mood instantly lightened up. "Just kidding, I know what you want. It's inside," he said, gesturing inside his house. Again, silence from us. "Ah, what are you doing? Come on in. I know, bite," the man said, growing agitated. Finally, without a word, the 4 of us dropped our candy and ran. We must have run a mile because when we stopped, we were back in our neighborhood. Once we realized we were in our own neighborhood, we stopped running and started walking. As we were walking, we heard rustling in the wooded area next to the sidewalk. We stopped and turned to the area. "Get out here, you creep, so I can kick your ass," friend 1 yelled into the woods. Just then, the creepy man jumped out of the woods and began pummeling friend 1. Friend 1 kicked his nuts and was able to get the upper hand in the fight, eventually kicking him in the head and telling us to run away. The 4 of us ran faster than we had ever run before. We ran until we got to friend 2's house. Then there was knocking on the back door. That made us all stop. Friend 4 was about to answer when friend 1 tackled him and told him not to answer it. We all waited in silence to see if it would happen again. It did, but on the front door, so we grabbed kitchen knives and answered the door. It was just friend 2's mom and sister coming home. She asked us why we had knives, and friend 4 was about to say when friend 1 pinched him, implying that the real reason should be kept secret. Friend 2 quickly made up some lie and his mom didn't inquire much more about it. At around 12, we all went home. Life went on for normal for about a week until one night at 2 in the morning I received a call from friend 2. "Bro, why are you calling me? It's like 2 in the morning," I said. "Dude, it wasn't her," he said. "What do you mean?" I said, half asleep. What he said next shocked me to the very core. On Halloween, my mom never knocked on the back door. This story happened when I was young and dumb. This happened in the early 90s. I recently remembered this, but it's always been in the back of my mind. In 1991, I was dressing up to go trick-or-treating. I didn't have many friends back then, so I was going out with one other person that I was kind of friends with. Fast forward about an hour, we had gone to every house on all the nearby streets that we could. There was one more street we were allowed to go to, since we were given boundaries. We both lived around that area and knew every street like the back of our hands. We were about to go to the last street when I saw another one nearby, close enough that it was only a few meters away. It was a short, dead-end street with only a few houses on it. The few streetlights were dim and the houses seemed old, but besides that, the street seemed normal. I pointed it out to my friend, but she seemed cautious and said that it wasn't worth it. I, however, wanted to get every piece of unhealthy candy I could. So we agreed that I'd meet her back at the street she wanted to go on and I would go to the dead-end one. I ran over to it. While I walked down it, I got more and more on edge. It was darker than I thought. Most of the houses seemed empty with no trace of life for as far as you could see. Occasionally, I would knock, but no one answered. I reached the end of the street, and the last house there seemed so old and rotted that it could break any minute, but it had a few lazy decorations scattered around its lawn. I was hopeful and knocked on the door. I could hear quiet footsteps from inside, and for a second I wondered if I should back out, but I hadn't come this far to just bail out. The door creaked open. The first thing I noticed was that the house inside was extremely dark, as if there were no lights on inside. My eyes adjusted quickly, though, and I could make out some things inside. Shapes and shadows. A man opened it, easily over 70 years. He was lanky and thin with rough skin. He was wearing thick clothes despite the fact that it was a warm night out. His smile stretched across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. I felt uncomfortable around him, but I tried to tell myself that he was just a little weird, and that was it. Trick or treat. He gestured for me to come in, and he spoke slowly. "I'll have to excuse myself, sweetheart. I'm so forgetful at this age, and I've forgotten to get the candy. Would you be as kind as to get it for me? I'm too old to walk around everywhere." He smiled with evil in his eyes. "It's just around the corner." I was scared, but I didn't know anything about stranger danger at that age, and I trusted everyone. It was a stupid decision, and I know it. I had walked through the open door. I was terrified by now. Once I had walked far enough to be past the corner, I saw a shadow in the back of my vision. I glanced at it. What I saw still haunts me. It was a figure. A person. They were on all fours, and they were looking at me. They almost didn't look human. Its clothes were ripped to shreds, scars and dried blood plagued its face. It was thin enough to look malnourished. I knew it wasn't just a Halloween costume. Before it could move towards me, I ran. I booked it. I pushed past the man, but he grabbed my arm. I felt long nails digging into my skin, and the adrenaline dulled the pain. I remember the old man's face as I left. His scarce eyebrows turned down to a glare. It was just my child eyes, but his eyes seemed to disappear, like there were only dark holes in their place. I wiggled out of his grip and sprinted down the street. I heard fast footsteps behind me. I ran to my friend and the footsteps stopped. I didn't hear them walking back, and when I looked back, nothing was there, and the house looked untouched. I wondered why my friend was only passing the second house on that street. I had been gone at least 30 minutes. She asked me why I had been so quick. I don't remember what I said, nothing at all. Only days later, my mom drove me down the street my friend was on. I couldn't see the dead-end street. It was like it just disappeared. No one believes what happened, but I don't blame them. I wouldn't either. I don't know if that was just a childish hallucination, but the memory is still extremely vivid. I tried to search for the house, but I don't remember the street name or house number, so there's no traces of what happened. I've since moved away, but that street still makes me feel extremely uncomfortable, like I'm being watched.